My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Let's talk about a topic that weighs heavily on many hearts, a topic that for some feels like a constant struggle between the soul's yearning and religious duty music. In our beautiful ummah, there is a well-known and respected scholarly opinion that prohibits musical instruments. We hear this, we respect it, and many of us strive with all our might to abide by it. But for others, this creates a deep and painful conflict. Why? Because they feel in their core that a beautiful, uplifting melody, a song of devotion, or a harmonious tune cannot be inherently evil. This leads them to a different conclusion, one that is also rooted in Islamic scholarship, though less popularized. The foundational belief that Islam is not hard, is not merely a comforting platitude offered to make the faith more palatable. It is a divine promise and a central pillar upon which the entire structure of the religion is built. To understand why some sincere Muslims find room for the permissibility of music within their practice, one must first deeply internalize this principle of ease or yusr, as articulated by Allah Himself and demonstrated by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This concept is the lens through which they view all religious rulings, especially those that are not explicitly and categorically defined in the primary texts. Allah says in the Holy Quran, in a verse that resonates with profound mercy, of I, He has not placed upon you in the religion any difficulty, says Surah Al-Hajj 78. This is not a passive observation, but an active declaration of Allah's intent. The Creator, in His infinite wisdom, is aware of the human condition, our strengths, our weaknesses, our complexities, and our capacities. He did not reveal a faith designed to break our spirit or crush our innate human nature, known as fitra. Instead, the Sharia was sent as a mercy, a guidance, and a healing for what is in the hearts. It is a framework designed to nurture the human soul, to help it transcend its base desires, and to channel its immense potential towards goodness and God consciousness. When a ruling seems to create an unbearable conflict within that very fitra, such as the innate human appreciation for melody, harmony, and rhythm, it prompts a believer to return to this foundational principle and seek a deeper understanding. This principle of removing hardship, known as the raf al-haraj, is operationalized throughout Islamic law. We see it in the concessions granted to the traveler, who is permitted to shorten and combine prayers and to break his fast in Ramadan. We see it in the allowance for the sick and the elderly to pray sitting or lying down. We see it in the permission to consume otherwise forbidden food when one is in a state of dire necessity and facing starvation. These are not exceptions to the rule, they are the rule. They demonstrate that the default setting of Islamic law is facilitation, not complication. The objective is to make worship accessible and the path to Allah clear, not to create a series of impossible tests that only the most ascetic can pass. When we apply this lens to the issue of music, the internal struggle many face comes into sharp focus. For a vast number of people, music is not merely entertainment, it is a language of the soul. It is the lullaby a mother sings to her child, a sound of pure, untarnished love. It is the harmonious chant of worshippers remembering God in a gathering of daikra. It is the stirring national anthem that evokes a lawful love for one's homeland and community. It is the melodious recitation of the Quran, the last tajweed, which is itself a form of highly regulated and spiritual music that moves people to tears. To tell a believer that all forms of instrumental music are inherently and unequivocally sinful, without distinction, can feel like telling them that a fundamental part of their human capacity for emotional expression, a capacity given to them by Allah, is inherently corrupt. This creates a cognitive and spiritual dissonance that is deeply painful. For those who lean towards the permissibility of music, this pain is a signal. It is not a sign of a weak faith, but rather an indication that a more nuanced application of the principle of ease may be required. They argue that if the primary sources, the Quran and Sunnah, do not contain a definitive, unambiguous, and universal prohibition, then the default ruling for things in the world is permissibility al-asfil ashya al-baha. The burden of proof, therefore, falls on those who claim something is forbidden. While they deeply respect the scholarly opinion that prohibits music based on certain interpretations of hadith, they also acknowledge the other valid scholarly opinions that disagree. They see the prohibition not as a closed door, but as one jihad among others, an effort to apply Islamic principles in a specific context. That context is crucial. The scholars who permitted certain forms of music, such as the great Imam al-Ghazali, were not giving a blanket approval to all sounds. They were meticulously discerning. They drew a stark line between music that incites hedonism, promiscuity, and forgetfulness of Allah, and music that inspires reflection, courage, tenderness, and love for the divine. This is the essence of applying the principle of ease with wisdom. It does not mean a free for all. It means a careful, intentional, and responsible engagement with the world. It is the difference between forbidding the knife, because it can be used to murder, and teaching people how to use it to perform life-saving surgery and to prepare nourishing food. Therefore, for a believer who finds solace in a gentle instrumental piece, motivation in a powerful orchestral score, or joy in a traditional cultural melody that contains no sinful lyrics, the principle of Islam is not hard, provides a framework for conscience. It allows them to approach this aspect of their life with a sense of balance and gratitude, rather than guilt and fear. They can set their intention and niyyah that this music is a means to maintain a positive and balanced state of mind, which in turn helps them be a better, more patient, and more productive Muslim. They are channeling a part of their God-given fitra in a way that does not lead them to sin, but rather enhances their appreciation of the beauty that Allah has created in the world. Ultimately, clinging to the principle of ease is an act of trust in Allah's mercy. It is the belief that the God who gifted humanity the capacity to create and be moved by beautiful sounds would not, without a clear and definitive proof, declare that very capacity to be a path to hellfire. It is an affirmation that Islam is a complete way of life, capable of engaging with all human experiences without always requiring absolute rejection. It is a call to move beyond a binary of pure prohibition and pure permissibility and into a more mature, nuanced space of purposeful and conscious living, where every action, including listening to a melody, can be an act of worship if done with the right intention and within the boundaries of what is morally good. This understanding liberates the believer from self-imposed hardship and allows their faith to be a source of joy and elevation, just as its creator intended. The assertion that a diversity of scholarly opinion exists on the permissibility of music is not a modern apologetic stance invented to justify contemporary desires. It is a historical and intellectual reality deeply embedded within the rich tapestry of Islamic jurisprudence. To appreciate this is to understand that Islam is not a monolithic entity with a single, unchanging voice on every minute aspect of life, but a living tradition of interpretation, or ijtihad, where qualified scholars have for centuries engaged with the primary texts, the Quran and the Sunnah, to derive rulings for their communities. The discourse on music known as Sama is a profound example of this intellectual pluralism, a field where esteemed luminaries of the faith arrived at different conclusions based on their understanding of the evidence and their methodological principles. The foundation of this disagreement rests primarily on the fact that the Holy Quran does not contain a direct, unequivocal command prohibiting music. The verses often cited in the debate, such as Surah Luqman 3:1 and 6, which mentions idle talk, law al-hadith, and Surah Isra 17:64, which references the voice, the sawt, are open to interpretation. The classical exegetes, this Mufassiron, differed significantly on what these terms encompass. Some, like the Venerable Ibn Abbas and Ibn Masud, are recorded in classical sources like Tafsir al-Tabari to have interpreted Vlailao al-Hadith as including singing and music. Others, however, understood it more broadly to refer to any speech that diverts from the remembrance of Allah, including falsehood, polytheism, or even frivolous conversation that carries no benefit, without specifying musical instruments as its primary or sole meaning. This lack of a categorical Quranic prohibition is the first and most crucial space where scholarly difference, itilaf, was able to emerge. It meant that the ruling would have to be derived from the prophetic traditions, which themselves became a field of intense scholarly investigation. When we turn to the hadith literature, the landscape becomes even more complex. There are several hadiths that appear to condemn musical instruments, such as the one mentioning that Allah sent His messenger with guidance, and among His guidance is that He forbade musical instruments, are part of a longer hadith narrated in various forms. However, the scholars of hadith themselves differed on the authenticity and interpretation of these narrations. Some jurists, particularly those from the Hanbali and Shafi'i schools in certain periods, considered these hadiths strong enough to establish a general prohibition. Yet, other scholars pointed to weaknesses in the chains of transmission of some of these reports, or argued that the wording was not general but specific to certain contexts, such as the instruments associated with drinking parties and lewd gatherings that were prevalent in pre-Islamic ignorance. It is within this scholarly space that some of the most respected figures in Islamic history articulated a more nuanced position. The great Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, a towering scholar of Islamic theology, philosophy, and jurisprudence, dedicated significant portions of his seminal work, Ihya Ulama al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, to the spiritual and psychological effects of sama, or listening. For al-Ghazali, the permissibility or impermissibility of music was not a question that could be answered in a vacuum. It depended entirely on its content and its effect on the listener's heart. He drew a clear analogy: a sword is a tool in the hand of a warrior defending a community. It is a virtue, but in the hand of a murderer, it is a vice. Similarly, a beautiful voice or a melodious instrument is a tool. If it stirs in the heart love for Allah, longing for the divine tenderness and positive spiritual states, then it is not only permissible but praiseworthy. He described how the Sufis and pious predecessors would use spiritual audition as a means to attain spiritual ecstasy and a closer connection to God. For al-Ghazali, to deny this potential was to deny a powerful means of spiritual awakening. This view was not isolated to al-Ghazali. We find echoes of it in the practices and writings of other major traditions. The Maliki school of law, particularly in North and West Africa, has historically held a more lenient view regarding the yazdaf, a simple frame drum, and even other instruments in celebratory contexts like weddings, based on authentic reports of the Prophet permitting such activities. The Hanafi school also demonstrated flexibility, with classical Hanafi texts often categorizing musical instruments as merely disliked, rather than absolutely forbidden haram, acknowledging a gradation in the ruling. Furthermore, the cultural and scholarly landscape of Al-Andalus was renowned for its integration of music into intellectual and spiritual life, with philosophers like Ibn Rushd, Averroes also engaging with the concept of music's ethical and emotional impact. This historical itilaf is not a matter of picking and choosing what suits one's desires. It is a rigorous scholarly process grounded in principles. The scholars who permitted music did so by applying key juristic maxims such as the default state of all things is permissibility until evidence of prohibition is established, and certainty is not overruled by doubt. Since the evidence for a total categorical prohibition was not considered certain nafkatat by these scholars, but rather speculative as zanif, they felt it was not permissible to declare something haram that Allah had not made unequivocally so. Therefore, when a Muslim today finds themselves drawn to the opinion that allows for a broader engagement with music, they are not necessarily turning away from tradition. They are, in fact, aligning themselves with a strand of that very tradition, a strand that prioritizes the spirit of the law alongside its letter, that recognizes the complexity of the human heart, and that trusts in the principle that Allah's mercy encompasses all things. They are choosing to follow a valid ijtihad that sees the world not as a place of inherent corruption from which we must completely isolate ourselves, but as a creation of Allah where beauty exists as a sign of His majesty, a beauty that can, with the right intention and discipline, become a means of drawing nearer to the divine, not a means of straying from his path. This recognition of scholarly diversity is thus an act of both intellectual honesty and spiritual seeking, affirming that the gates of jihad were never fully closed, and that the Muslim conscience has multiple authentic paths to navigate the challenges of modern life.